You're looking at 26 kilometers of coastline, a stretch so small you could drive it in under 20 minutes. But this tiny slice of sea isn't just a beach, it's Jordan's lifeline to the world. Without it, Jordan might not even exist as we know it. Jordan is landlocked, almost. For most of its borders, there is nothing but sand and stone stretching endlessly in every direction. Until at the country's southern tip, a narrow finger of land reaches toward the Red Sea. Just 26 kilometers of coastline. That's it. A mere sliver that connects an entire nation to the world beyond its deserts. To the west lies Israel, to the east Saudi Arabia, and just across the water, Egypt. Three nations with clashing interests, shifting alliances, and histories of war. And right in the middle of all that, Jordan. No oil wealth, no vast ports, no deep water access except for this tiny stretch of sea known as the Gulf of Aqaba. But within that short shoreline lies Jordan's heartbeat. Every imported car, every crate of food, every lifeline of fuel has passed through it. It's the artery that keeps the country breathing. Close it and the nation suffocates. Keep it open and Jordan survives. Over the past century, these 26 kilometers have quietly shaped everything about Jordan's identity, its diplomacy, its economy, even its borders. Wars were fought and maps redrawn so this coastline could exist. Foreign powers bargained over it, kings protected it, and generations of Jordanians depended on it without even realizing how fragile it was. Think about that for a second. A nation of more than 10 million people balancing its fate on a strip of sea shorter than the runway at Heathrow. It's an extraordinary irony that Jordan's stability, one of the rare constants in the Middle East, rests on a line of coast you could walk before lunch. This is the story of how a few kilometers of salt water became the foundation of an entire country's destiny. A century ago, Jordan didn't even have a coastline. At the end of World War I, when empires crumbled and maps were being redrawn with the careless strokes of colonial pens, the future of the Middle East was decided in smoke-filled rooms far from the desert sands. The Ottoman Empire was gone, and in its place, the British and the French were carving up territories, lines on paper that would decide destinies for generations. Amid that chaos stood a man named Abdullah ibn al-Hussein, a prince without a throne, leading tribes and fighters who had helped Britain defeat the Ottomans. But as new nations emerged, Syria, Iraq, Palestine, Abdullah's newly created land, Transjordan, faced a fatal flaw. It was almost entirely landlocked. No ports, no sea, no direct connection to the global stage. For a small, struggling state, that was a death sentence. Trade, defense, communication, all impossible without access to the water. Abdullah understood this. He knew that without a window to the sea, Transjordan would remain a forgotten stretch of desert. And so he began to negotiate. Patiently, persistently, sometimes desperately. The British, who saw Jordan as a useful buffer zone between their colonies, eventually agreed to grant him a narrow corridor to the Red Sea. Just 26 kilometers of coastline, barely noticeable on a map. But for Abdullah, it was everything. That small wedge of land would become Aqaba, a name that now carries the weight of Jordan's survival. A place that began as a remote fishing village and evolved into the nation's only seaport, its economic artery, and its geopolitical anchor. Abdullah had done something remarkable. He secured a future for a country that didn't even exist yet. His vision was simple. If Jordan could touch the sea, it could touch the world. And it worked. That decision, made in the quiet corridors of post-war diplomacy, shaped every Jordanian generation that followed. Jordan's coastline wasn't a gift. It was a prize wrestled from history, and it became the foundation of everything that came next. For Jordan, Aqaba became more than just a port. It became the country's heartbeat, its only open door to the wider world. Every truck that carries food across the desert, every container of medicine, oil, or electronics that keeps the economy alive, almost all of it enters through this single strip of coast. Without Aqaba, Jordan would be a country trapped within its own borders. It's not just a harbor, it's an escape valve, a way to breathe in and out in a region that can feel like it's holding its breath. Goods from Asia, Africa, and Europe flow through here, bypassing the complicated maze of political borders that surround the kingdom. Aqaba connects Jordan to the Red Sea, to the Suez Canal, and through it to the entire world. And it's not an exaggeration to say that in times of crisis, those 26 kilometers kept Jordan alive. When the Suez Canal closed during the 1956 crisis, Aqaba became the fallback. During the Iran-Iraq war, when northern routes were too dangerous, it was Aqaba that kept trade moving. And during both Gulf wars, as regional supply lines collapsed, Aqaba once again became the only artery keeping Jordan's economy from total suffocation. For a country with no oil, few natural resources, and surrounded by volatility, Aqaba became stability made physical, the nation's anchor in this storm. Every pipeline, every railway, every highway leading south converges on that one shimmering port. And as the 20th century came to a close, Aqaba became even more vital. When Jordan signed its peace treaty with Israel in 1994, it wasn't just an act of diplomacy, it was a deal of survival. That treaty secured trade routes, energy cooperation, and access to shared water resources. It ensured that the flow of goods through Aqaba could continue unthreatened. So when you look at Jordan today, a stable nation in a region defined by turmoil, remember this: much of that resilience traces back to a single idea: keep Aqaba open and Jordan endures. Lose it and everything stops. 26 kilometers may not sound like much. You could walk it in an afternoon, drive it in 15 minutes, or miss it entirely if you blinked at the wrong spot on a map. But within that small stretch lies a universe of contradictions, beauty and danger, prosperity and fragility, all compressed into a single thread of coastline. It's Jordan's gateway to the global economy, the port that keeps 10 million people connected to the outside world. But it's also one of the most militarized pieces of land in the entire region. Every ship that sails in, every truck that rolls out is watched. To the west, Israeli patrols monitor their own port of Eilat. To the south, Saudi Arabia eyes its border carefully. And across the water, Egypt stands guard on the Sinai. Aqaba is surrounded by watchtowers, not just of stone and steel, but of politics. This tiny shoreline has brought Jordan stability and wealth, yet it's also made the country vulnerable. The very sea that sustains it can just as easily cut it off. Regional conflicts have closed its waters before. Blockades have squeezed it. Even shifts in global trade or tourism can send shockwaves through the economy. Aqaba is both a lifeline and a liability, a blessing that Jordan can never take for granted. And then there is the competition. Just a few kilometers away, Israel's port of Eilat gleams with cranes and cargo ships, offering an alternative route for the same trade Jordan depends on. Every new dock built there, every shipping deal signed elsewhere is a quiet reminder that Aqaba's dominance can never be assumed. But perhaps the greatest irony of all is that Jordan's leaders saw this vulnerability coming and tried to fix it. They knew that 26 kilometers of coastline wasn't enough to secure the nation's future. So they did something almost unthinkable in the world of modern geopolitics. They tried to buy more coastline. You won't believe what happened when they did. In 1965, something extraordinary happened, quietly, almost invisibly, beyond the headlines of war and revolution that usually defined the Middle East. Jordan and Saudi Arabia sat down to redraw the map. The goal wasn't conquest or revenge. It wasn't about pride, oil, or religion. It was about access. A few more precious kilometers of coastline that could change Jordan's fate forever. At the time, Jordan's 26 kilometers along the Gulf of Aqaba were barely enough to sustain its growing trade. The port was crowded, the city hemmed in by mountains and borders, and the country's leaders knew that a single crisis could choke off their only window to the sea. So King Hussein made a bold proposal. Jordan would trade land for sea. In a series of delicate secret negotiations, Jordan offered Saudi Arabia a swath of empty desert in the east, thousands of square kilometers of sand, in exchange for a small extension of coastline to the south. On paper, it looked like a single swap, desert for desert. But in reality, it was a masterstroke. That extra stretch gave Jordan a better harbor, new potential for port expansion, and more room for development in Aqaba, a move that would pay off for decades. It strengthened ties with Saudi Arabia, created a friendlier southern border, and ensured that Jordan's access to the Red Sea could never again be questioned. Few people noticed it at the time. There were no grand signing ceremonies or breaking news broadcasts, but historians today recognize it as one of the smartest geopolitical trades in modern history. The kind of quiet, strategic decision that defines a nation's long-term survival. Because in geopolitics, as in life, power doesn't always belong to those who hold the most land. It belongs to those who understand which land matters most. And for Jordan, that land wasn't in the vast stretches of the desert, it was in those few shining kilometers where the mountains touch the sea. From empires to oil routes, from war to peace, Jordan's entire destiny has floated on these 26 kilometers of sea. Every empire that has risen and fallen around it has left its mark here, but the coastline remains, quietly holding the country's future in its hands. What began as a bargaining chip in the aftermath of war has become the foundation of Jordan's stability, its economy, and its very identity. It's remarkable when you think about it, how a nation can be defined not by the land it covers but by the line where its desert meets the water. Those few kilometers have carried the weight of kings, the ambitions of empires, and the hopes of millions of people who depend on them for connection and survival. Through every storm, political, economic, and literal, Aqaba has endured. It has seen soldiers march, diplomats bargain, and traders unload the lifeblood of a nation, and still today, ships glide out from its harbor, carrying Jordan's story to the world beyond the horizon. In a region where borders shift and power constantly changes hands, Jordan's coastline stands as a reminder that sometimes strength isn't loud or expansive, it's quiet, precise, and deeply strategic. It's not the size of the territory that matters, but the understanding of its value. So next time you look at a map, pause for a moment. Look beyond the big countries, the bold lines, and the vast colors. There's a sliver of blue hugging the bottom of Jordan, small enough to miss, yet powerful enough to shape its destiny. Because history isn't always written by those with more land, but by those who understand which part of it truly matters. If this story made you look at the world a little differently, hit that like button and subscribe for more hidden geopolitical stories you have probably never heard before. Thanks for watching, mate, and thanks for hitting the subscribe button.